Mark is the founder, in fact, of Mr. Wet Training Assessment. He's an award-winning trainer, author, and entrepreneur. He continues to push the boundaries of edutainment and believes that participant interaction and fun are integral to the learning experience. He's been involved in workplace and vocational education for about 25 years now and has conducted more than 300 training and assessment courses over the past 15 years. He presents workshops and keynote presentations in more than a dozen countries. He's a busy, busy man. He's my boss. I get paid to say nice things about him, but every word of it comes with great honour and esteem, and he's been a friend for a long time. Mark, are you ready to go with today's webinar?
Absolutely, Damien. And with great power comes great responsibility. So thanks for that. Thanks for that impressive intro there, Damien. And
No
my complete rip-off of Spider-Man by the sounds of things. So listen, folks, I'm super thrilled that we've got some, quite a crowd today, and I think this is an important topic for us in that RTO space. But let's make sure, particularly some of those new guys that just jumped on the line there can hear us okay. So if you can use the hands up function just to make sure that everyone can hear me loud and clear, that'll be awesome. Either that or you can pop something in the chat window that says, yes, I can hear you loud and clear, but the hands-free will be the easiest way to make that work. And it looks like Damien's plenty of hands are coming up, which is great. It's always good to check those.
Looks like we're ready for liftoff.
Ready for liftoff. Now, our first poll today just gives me an idea of where you are joining us from on this big, brown, beautiful land of ours, and wet in many cases around the country. So we're going to launch a very quick poll there and find out where you are joining us today. So let's take a few moments to quickly submit that, and then Damien will present just where our cohort is joining us on this webinar from today.
Just waiting a few more seconds for the votes to roll in. So jump into the poll, folks. Where are you in the world today? Please let us know. I can see that one of the states is starting to dominate the answers already, Mark. And I'm just going to close that poll and show us all the answers so we can have a look at what we've got. Mark, do you want to lead us through the results?
Yeah, well, it looks like Queensland is mostly represented there. 54% of our team today is from the Sunshine. Well, we'll use that as a usual situation, a sunshine state, followed by New South Wales ACT with 23%, and then we do have a smattering of folks coming from the rest of the country, which is awesome. So listen, folks, I think that it's great to join us today, because this is an issue that is facing many of the RTOs around the country. Regardless of where you're from, this is one of the top 5 ongoing non-compliances for RTOs. And if you were joining us a little bit earlier, you would have heard me in the sound check remind us that industry engagement is something we need to do, but it's also something we need to do. So yes, we have to do it to meet the requirements for the RTO standards 2015, but it's also something I think a good business does, to continue to inform their practice by getting feedback and information from those they are charged to serve. So at the opening of our webinar today, we had some really fast, right off the bat, people there get these word puzzles. So listen, for those of you that didn't quite get all the answers, I've got them on the screen there. We do like to start our webinars with these brain teasers, because I like you thinking outside the circles a little bit of time. In this particular case, we did have falling or dropping temperature, followed by 2 under par, and then fat chance, which closes out the top row. Underneath that, we had the broken heart, hot under the collar, and then the head in the sand. Now, I'm going to take that last square very quickly and talk about what I think a lot of organisations are doing out there. They put their head in the sand when it comes to industry engagement, or they try to get a friendly, someone that they know, to sign off something that says, yes, I've done it, without really thinking about the critical role that industry engagement has in impacting our business positively, and certainly creating a sustainable training organisation. And that's what today is all about. Now, I also posed these questions on the loop this morning. Some of you may not have seen them, so I'll give you a chance to kind of consider them again right now. In terms of true or false, which of these do you think are true or false? Do you think partnering with employers or industry groups is part of it? Is it embedding staff with enterprise? Assessment validation, perhaps networking with industry events and or conferences? Use the chat window. What do you think? Are some of these true, some of these false? If you prefer to use the numbers as they're listed there on the screen, tell me which ones you think are true. Just take a few moments in the chat window now. So Neil and Helen say they're all true. It looks like that we're getting lots of support that from the rest of the candidates. Melissa's agreeing, Liz and Tammy also saying, listen, I think to some degree these are true. And I've got to say they are. They're all true. And what's really interesting here is there's no one single right way to do this, but we do need to have a strategy for it, and it needs to be a defendable strategy. So we'll talk today about some of the many ways you could create this fabric of industry engagement, and depending on the size of your RTO and the access you have to your audience, if you like, you can choose the right tools for the right job. So yes, all of these are in fact true. Now, the really interesting thing here, and this is what it says on the screen, according to the AskWork user guide for the Standards for RTOs 2015, there's no specific method or approach that we must use. So in the end, it is up to us. The only thing we have to prove is that we've done it, and then we've acted upon that information or that feedback we've got from the industry. So very much the words, I am paraphrasing, but the key words there are all around, have we informed our practice in training and assessment based on the industry engagement? So as long as we're doing that and we're aligning with industry, then life is beautiful. It is the proverbial sunshine and blue skies, as many of us hope that it was around the country right now. So that's our sort of soft opening. Let's get up close and personal now with what's happening specifically with their webinar today. We'll define what industry engagement is. We'll talk about the responsibilities for RTOs. We'll look at who the industry is. And listen, from my experience and connecting with RTOs all over the country, I find that people generally have a fairly narrow view of what industry relates to. So I'm hopeful today to widen that view and give you a few ideas of where to go to get access to the industry. I think you'll be surprised that there's some really great support channels that maybe you didn't know before today. Towards the back end of the webinar, we'll talk about the must-haves according to the national regulator. Now, if you're joining us from Victoria or Western Australia, as we know that some of you are, these are still must-haves for your state regulator. So if you're with TAC in WA or the Victorian regulator in Victoria, then these must-haves will still also be quite relevant to you today. Towards the very end, and before we go, I'll share with you a blueprint for success. How do we create a sustainable approach to industry engagement? That's what I'm going to deliver on before we pop off today. And then we'll finish with the benefits and pitfalls of the approach that I'm suggesting. So let's lead with the first question. It's, what is industry engagement? In your own words, use the chat window. What do you think it means for you? I've given you a bit of a general idea, but listen, what do you think industry engagement is? Just take a few moments to, record your thoughts in the chat window. And whilst they're doing that, Damien, I'm interested to see if you've got any thoughts of your own about what industry engagement means to you.
Look, I've got a few thoughts, but I might be a little bit general and vague about it, Mark, because I don't want to prejudice the answers that are going to come in. But one of my thoughts about industry engagement is it's often things that we take for granted that we do, and they might be routine things or they might be casual conversations that we have with people, and we might not think of it as industry engagement. We might just think of it as general business practice or something that we routinely do. But often those little things that we do a lot of can be very, very effective industry engagement, and the regulator would support that as well.
Definitely, and from my perspective, Damien, I see that there's organic and deliberate. So the organic stuff's what you're talking about. You didn't know it was going to happen, but you've got a way of recording it, and then you've got the deliberate stuff there, which is what Melissa's sort of talking about here, about engaging with industry to inform things like your delivery, your content, your qualifications. Are they the right electives being selected in that packaging of a qualification? That might be something that we have to ask our people. Neil adds here, talking to and getting feedback from people who actually work in the industry, and therefore we can help our graduates to have that seamless transition into a job. So it makes a lot of sense, Neil, so thanks for your contribution. Alexandria adds, including industry in the decision making, if you like, in the creation of the delivery of training products, so that they have a relevant workplace and they can head it into life knowing that what they're learning in the classroom or with that RTO is going to be applicable on the job. Liz adds, networking as widely as possible is really worthwhile, making sure we're connecting with real people in real industry rather than just coming up with X, Y, Z making widgets. And Neil continues to add here, meeting and greeting potential future customers and clients who will use your current and future products being offered in that RTO. So some really great ideas there, folks. I love your thinking. And Mark also suggests here it's about talking to all areas of industry and getting as much feedback as you can. So big pat on the back for your contributions thus far, team. I'm going to extend that definition, and you create a really great user-friendly one for us today. But listen, the one I'm going to run with is this one that's popping on the screen. It's about connecting with industry to ensure that the training and assessment is based on current industry practices. It also meets the needs and ongoing expectations of that industry. And that's pretty much reflected in what you've put into the chat window, making sure we're talking to real people who really do the job, and we can empower our graduates to have that seamless transition, but also getting the hot tip on the emerging trends, the ongoing expectations, what's happening in that industry that we have to prepare our graduates for. So some really great ideas there, folks, and thanks for playing as always. So in terms of answering the next question, what could it involve? Industry engagement could involve a whole host of things, but listen, I'm going to give you a starting point. It's not limited to these, but listen, it's a starting point as I suggested. So it's about partnering with employers, industry groups, and other RTOs. And listen, I had a question during the week about someone who was looking to do validation, and I've got a topic on that in a few months' time. And they were saying, I don't know if I want to do the validation because that's my IP, and as soon as I do the validation, they'll see it. And listen, if I can be honest as I can there, I think we've got to get out of that bunker mentality. As soon as you go to market with the product, your students will see what you do, and potentially all of them could be competitors. And we can't live our lives thinking that everyone's going to steal our stuff. And ultimately, if we do the right thing and stay ahead of the curve, people will not respect the IP, but they're still behind us because we continue to innovate, continue to update because we're informing that practice with the industry. So I guess that's another reason why we should be doing these types of things. We could also involve employer nominees in things like advisory committees, reference groups, and validation panels. Now, what I'm going to encourage you to do today is to consider how to, I guess, sell this approach to your industry. Sometimes people come to me and they say, but nobody's got time to participate. I'm asking them to give up their time to give me feedback. I think it's a change in the narrative that's necessary. So if we say we'd like to appoint you to this very exclusive advisory committee, and this is the role of the committee, and this is your responsibilities, and this is how many times we might come to you throughout the year, are you comfortable with that? Because up front you're telling them what they would need to do and how much time commitment it's going to take, but also we're selling it because, we think that you're the very best of industry and we'd like your opinion. Now, a lot of the big companies, they do this, and they don't pay for it, okay, because they make people feel special because they're exclusively selected to sit on the panel or be that advisory committee nominee. A lot of people in our industry will also want to participate because they'll see some value to pad out their resume. They say, listen, I've sat on this committee, I've sat on this panel, I've made this specific contribution, and that also helps them to elevate them in future job opportunities. That's the change in narrative. Rather than coming cap in hand saying, please sir, or please madam, can you give me some feedback on our courses? Ultimately, it's a matter of how can we help us to help you, and we're helping each other out in a mutual benefit situation. So hopefully that gives you some ideas of how to make it that next step. In some organisations, you've got the luxury of being able to embed staff within enterprise, particularly if there's a little bit of a blurring of the edges where you're both the employer but also you have people that work for other organisations. And a lot of the TAFEs can do this quite well with their sessional trainers, where they're actually out there in industry working, but they also perform a training and assessment role for the institute or the TAFE college that they're working for. So that's a way that they kind of get that embedding stuff without necessarily it costing lots and lots of money. You might look at networking with industry associations and the like. professional groups and employer groups and so forth. And a little bit later on in the webinar, I will give you some information on where you can get a list of these groups. So a lot of people don't realise that there's a full database on this, and you can get the contact details and you can reach out rather than getting the challenge of having the door closed on you on a regular basis. You can also exchange knowledge, staff and resources with those industry groups and other networks. And one of my favourite ways of doing it is through assessment tool validation. So invariably I see the role of connecting with industry and assessment validation as being quite similar in terms of the questions you're asking and who you're asking. So you might be able to kill multiple birds with the single stone as the situation goes. So in this case, folks, I've got another question for you, which is, who are the industry? When I say industry engagement, who are those people that we're trying to connect with to inform our training and assessment practice? Please feel free to use the chat window to give us some ideas of who you think the industry are.
Mark, it sounds a little bit to me like you need a bit of a mafia voice when you say that. Who are the industry? Who are they? Who are the people that we deal with? I'd be interested to see the responses here as well.
Whilst we're doing that, I noticed that Neil's made a comment there about offering his services for free validation, and again, it upskills him, but also enables him to provide valuable feedback to those other organisations, but still no offers, which is kind of amazing. I know that Neil's a very experienced guy, so listen, if there's anybody on the line today that needs some validation support, we're happy to put you into contact with Neil through the back channel, so make sure you take advantage of his very generous offer there.
It's very generous offer, Neil, thanks.
So we're talking about different institutes here. You've got, in Melissa's case, the Institute of Certified Bookkeepers, so again a very relevant group for some of the training that she's doing there. Helen talks about the different stakeholders at a specific industry level or sector. Victoria adds employers, the regulator, peak bodies involved with, I guess, regulating our industry or supporting the industry. Rona suggests industry is the businesses that undertake the skills that you're teaching and assessing. So some great ideas coming through. Anyone with current industry experience is what Alexandria is suggesting there. And Liz goes on to say she's in the retail sector. So again, connecting with people that do that job and understand what the needs of those employees are will help her to fill out those courses more successfully. And listen, there's some really great extra comments there on the chat log there, which gives us a really broad idea of that. And I'm glad to see that we're thinking a little bit more broadly than just employers too. So some really great things. I think the last few times we've run this, Damien, most people have really looked at those employer groups as being central to the focus. So on the screen right now, you've got a bit of a URL here. It's from the federal government here, from business.gov.au. Which is generally used when you're starting up a business, but they've got some really good ideas about some of those peak bodies and other semi-autonomous groups that are there to support business regardless of the sector. So that might be a really good place to start. Now, I've just changed that URL. It's just changed recently, so I checked it yesterday, so this is the most up-to-date one. Let's not forget that you will get a copy of these slides, so you'll be able to get that later. And you will get a video recording of that too. So if you miss it, you'll certainly get access, because it is quite a long URL. So in answer to this question that I asked you to start with, pretty much anyone that has a stake in the training and assessment could be considered as industry. So of course it does include the enterprise or industry clients, such as employers. We've got industry regulators, so if you're doing something in that fisheries space, you might look at the Australian Fisheries Management Authority and talk to them about what the needs of their members are or the people that they regulate. You've got service skills organisations, such as Skills for Australia, which is the PricewaterhouseCoopers one that we have for the TAE and the business services stuff. Trade unions. Now here's what a lot of people don't realise, is that often trade unions have dedicated personnel that their key role is to continue to reach out to industry and find out what those roadblocks are, what those bottlenecks are, and what's going to be the best conditions for the employees, I should say. And in this particular case, connecting with them early, they can put you into contact with people within your industry segment, and they could be that conduit. So listen, don't forget that you've got those accessibilities there. So in this particular case, if you're doing something in that manufacturing space, you might talk to the Australian Manufacturers Union, or Manufacturing Workers Union, I should say. And then you've got, of course, industry associations and organisations such as the Advertising Institute of Australasia. And to help you through that, I've got a second URL, which is at the bottom of the screen right now. Now, this one is produced in Queensland, but it is a national list, and it has a whole host of business and industry associations in a register from A to Z. So again, if you're looking to find out who's an industry that represents your sector in the training and assessment that you deliver, then this is a really great starting point to get the contact details, to get a door to open and then have a conversation. And once again, a lot of the people on these lists will be welcome to it because it's in their charter. It's their responsibility to do that consultation. So you've got dedicated personnel who can help you out. So again, some food for thought when it comes to that. A quick poll that Damien's going to launch in just a sec. I want to get a feeling now for which industry groups you most commonly engage with when it comes to this function. Is it industry? Is it industry regulators? Is it the service skills organisations? Perhaps you are already tapping into the trade union connections, or maybe it's the industry associations and organisations you're checking out. Please feel free to vote now. So I think those votes are coming through, Damien.
Yes, we've got half the votes at the moment. So jump in there, cast your vote. Which industry groups do you most commonly engage with? And you can select multiple answers if you like. So it'll be interesting to see which groups people support. And I understand it takes a little bit longer to do this one because there's multiple responses. So Mark and I will give you a little bit of extra time here. We've got 60% of people who've cast votes so far. So we'll just wait a few more seconds. There's more rolling in.
I've certainly had greater success with those industry associations more recently, Damien, if I can have that as an anecdotal situation, because again, you've got people who've got those dedicated roles for consultation, and they have a charter too, which is great.
Yeah, that's true. It was interesting, a comment that Neil made early in the webinar today where he said you want people who actually work in industry. I like the emphasis on the word actually that Neil threw in, because he wants to make sure their industry engagement includes some people who actually have that work experience and are current in what's happening in the industry. And I think that was a very subtle but important point that Neil made earlier. Here's the results, Mark.
Okay, listen, 87% of you are actually using enterprise, which is no surprises there really, but it's really great to see that industry regulators, 67%, 60% industry organisations and associations are getting a whirl, and the service skills organisations at 40% and trade unions at 20%. So listen, a nice smattering across all of those, and for me it becomes a magical mystery tour, trying to take a selection of different industry representations so that we've got a really nice collective view. And the nice analogy I like to use at this point, it's like when you're putting together a jigsaw puzzle. One piece is not enough to see the big picture, but as you start putting the pieces together, the picture comes out from the page. And industry engagement is no different for me. If we're only going to a single source, we're never going to see the big picture. We're trying to get as wide a perspective as we can so we can have informed practice and really prepare our graduates to work in a diverse range of industries within their segment. So some great ideas there, folks. Thanks as always for the contribution. Neil's got some important advice there too. If you're a member of one of these associations, it makes it so much easier to move on through. So that might be a first stage to become a member of some of these associations, and thus you've got that door open. And Shafi is suggesting here that he consults, or they consult with a range of industry participants and clients. So again, getting both sides of the counter, I think, is a really important thing. So let's look at the next topic here, which is about the RTO requirements. We've talked about what industry engagement is and who the industry is that we can tap into, but what do we have to do to prove that something happened, So this is straight out of the standards. RTOs are required to record and be able to produce and audit, if requested, these two things: records of industry engagement and the industry relevance and currency and industry skills of all trainers and assessors. Now, the good news is at the back end of our webinar, I will give you a couple of different industry engagement logs and templates that you can use. These are also in the handouts that you'll get. They're already on the webinar now, which you could download, but you will get a link to this this webinar after today, and you'll be able to download those in the different document formats. So one of them's in Word, one of them's in Excel to allow you to manipulate those things. And I'll talk you through that a little bit later. So ultimately, the recording part of this is going to be critical. In terms of the standards themselves, it relates to standard 1.5 and 1.6. I'm not going to read these verbatim, but you can kind of see if you check out the screen now, industry engagement is firmly placed within those standards for RTOs 2015. Probably the key thing for me is in clause 1.6, which talks about the RTO implementing a range of strategies for industry engagement, and then of course the systematically using of those outcomes to ensure industry relevance. So for me, that's the key takeaway, and what our mission is when it comes to doing industry engagement well. So what does all this mean? Let's sort of break it down a bit further. It means that we need industry feedback about how the training and assessment's provided, and that makes a lot of sense. We also need to know how the resources are used, okay? So it's not just buying something off the shelf and just making it a one-size-fits-all. We have to demonstrate that if we've bought something and we haven't created it ourselves, that we've got some feedback from industry about how that might need to be contextualized or added to. And this might be at a really simple level, changing the case studies to make them speak to the cohort that are doing the training and assessment. So everything else might be quite similar, but you're trying to personalize it and customize it for that particular audience. And again, that's a really nice bit of paperwork you can show. Here is the feedback, here's the before and after, and this is what we've done to make it relevant to that particular group. But the one that I think's underdone out there is we also have to get feedback on how our trainers and assessors are prepared for the needs of industry. And as many of you know, we specialise in that TAE space, and it's been quite the job putting together our addition to scope application and trying to find out, from a wide audience about whether our new resources are going to be, industry specific and appropriate and so forth, but also making sure we maintain things like volume of learning and making sure that what we're doing is nice and robust in that assessment space. And all of that kind of comes together. It's been a challenge. And during that, one of the things that was highlighted is how do we make sure that our industry has had feedback on who we put in front of them in terms of the trainer and assessor. Do they have extra expectations about what that person would need to do in addition to the minimum requirements set out in the standards for RTOs 2015? And late last year we ran a survey, and some of you may have participated in that, where we asked that very question, what was the kind of experience you expected from a TAE trainer and assessor? What is the minimum qualification you thought that they should hold? And then what are some of the skills and attributes that you think a TAE assessor should possess? And we had a very, very big contribution on that one, folks. And I've published some findings on this on our LinkedIn site. And if anybody wants that, I'm very happy to make that public as well. So feel free to email us, and I can give you that report. But ultimately, what it did for us is it gave us a really very crystal position on what those expectations were, and it didn't take a lot of time to do. The time frame was crunching the numbers, because I think in the end we got 400 odd respondents. I think 478 respondents, if I'm not mistaken, Damien, in the end. And it just takes time to analyse. But once we got the analytics there, it painted a really important picture of not only how we prepare our trainers and assessors, but also what things we should look for in the future. Because interestingly enough, 20% of our respondents thought that a degree in a relevant adult learning situation would have been their minimum requirement or expectation of a TAE trainer, which is quite different from what the standards for RTO says. Now, it's only 20% now, but if we did this study every year and that went up to 27%, to 30%, and so on and so forth, we now know that we have to do something in preparing our trainers and assessors to meet the needs of industry. So that's one way of making that work. So to go a bit further on this trainer and assessor industry currency, this could include having knowledge of the latest techniques, processes and technology. So there might be some additional things that they want in that space. It might be about possessing a high level of product knowledge. So in some of the stuff that you do, you might require some of that industry knowledge about the manufacturers that are using, sorry, the manufacturers of the products that you use, and maybe some of that consulting type advice, which is above and beyond what's set out in the training package. They might also require a demonstrated knowledge of legislation relevant to the industry, or in fact possessing that vendor or trade qualification. So some people in that IT space will often require things like your Microsoft Computer Solutions certificates or the Cisco Systems certificates, which again is above the requirements of the training package. So again, the more we can connect with industry, the easier it's definitely going to be. I noticed there's a few comments there about looking for that extra research, and Damien, we've got all your email addresses, so I'm happy. Listen, what I think is going to be the easiest, Damien, is that I'll make that full report available to everybody. So it's not loaded up now, but when you get the email within the 48 hours, we'll make sure that that extra report is on there, so everyone benefits from that report. If that sounds like a good idea, Damien, I can definitely do that for you later today.
Yeah, that's great, Mark. It sounds like we've gone to the local carnival. Every child wins a prize. You all get a copy, everyone, and we'll include that in the materials that you'll link to tomorrow in the email.
Makes a lot of sense. So how could we prove industry currency? What do you think, folks? What are some of the things we can do as a trainer and assessor to prove that we've got that industry currency? Please feel free to use the chat window now to pop your ideas in.
So, ladies and gentlemen, pop your answer in the chat. How else could we prove industry currency? And I'm guessing from the discussions I have with many people in different RTOs that this is an issue that comes up from time to time, and sometimes we've even got to have relatively difficult conversations with other trainers and assessors to try and encourage them to demonstrate that currency. And I see the answers are starting to come in already, Mark.
Definitely. So a letter from an employer there from Shafi, which is great. You might volunteer as a board or a committee member at a local community group that also functions in that industry sector, which is great. Melissa says, holding bi-monthly meetings to members as a volunteer for the ICB in this particular case. Having that direct industry engagement is going to be super important, not only for your people, but also for your sustainability as a business. Jan Marie says spending time working in the area that you train and assess, so certainly getting out there back in industry, getting back on the tools as it were, gives you some really great insight about what the challenges are, but also what those expectations are. Victoria adds it's about attending industry conferences and workshops and other relevant PD. Membership of industry groups, Neil adds. Drubra suggests relevant job experience, so again that embedding staff within industry could be a solution for you there. Shafi adds, the current resume signed and dated and verified by relevant people could be another way through. Memberships and associations, current work in the field, Alexandria says. Mark says a return to industry, working with the employers where you can is great. And listen, mentoring is on there too. And making sure that you're part of those industry releases and getting access to what's really happening. So listen, great ideas there, folks. And then Joe adds regular subscription to our journals. It's a perfect response. You should all sign up to our Yours in Training, and that will make you current all of the time. At least tongue-in-cheek. So, but there's a diverse range of things on the chat window. Some really, really great ideas there. And as always, folks, making sure that we are contributing widely on this webinar will contribute to your own industry currency as well, and getting those e-certificates and statements that you can put into an e-portfolio as part of that picture as well. Neil has a final comment there is about updating the qualifications, making sure you've got the latest stuff, and using those massively online communities, the MOOCs there, doing those online courses. A lot of the sandstone universities, have got some really great free stuff that's out there that you can be a part of with those communities. So it's well worth checking out. Some great ideas, guys. Appreciate it. Now I do have to have that fierce conversation with the group about what we must have, and this is true for every RTO out there in the space, regardless of your jurisdiction. And I'm reminded about something that my son does, and I've got this picture right on the screen now. He says things like, I see how it is, and he closes his eyes a bit closer together, a bit like the picture here from the SpongeBob situation. And hopefully your eyes will get a bit narrow too, and you will see what you have to be doing to make sure that we're on the right path, or the righteous path. So ultimately here, team, we must be able to demonstrate that industry representatives, I should say, have had input into these things. They've had input into the skills and knowledge you require trainers and assessors to hold. And they also have to have input into the resources your RTO uses for training and assessment. And I go back to what I said earlier, if you're just buying stuff off the shelf, they could be really great, credible, fully mapped resources, but are they the right fit for that audience? And that's really the million-dollar question there, and the regulator will pick you up on it. If you can't demonstrate that you've customized that, or at least had some input on whether these are the right tools for the right jobs, invariably they'll say, listen, you need to do more. Okay, so that's something that a lot of RTOs are finding right now. The next must-have here is you must retain evidence. Okay, I mean, we work in the RTO space, we understand what evidence is, we need to support our claim that something happened. But ultimately that evidence in this particular case is around the consultation that we've had with those relevant industry stakeholders, and this is the really important point, and we've incorporated that stakeholder feedback into the RTO resources and practices. So a little bit later on in the webinar, when I sort of showcase the log, you'll see a way to be able to connect the dots. In the log it says who we've talked to, what we talked about, what the issues were, who was involved, what the date was, and then the most important thing is what was the action? What did we do? What was the outcome? And then for those of you that like to hyperlink things, you can then put a hyperlink there to say, well, this is the minutes of the meeting, or here's the resource that we looked at, and here are the changes. So that really provides a really easy way from anyone that looks at it to see, yes, we've got the evidence of not only the consultation, but we've seen what you've done with it, and we can prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that you've used that information from industry to inform your training and assessment practice. Now, a lot of people say, but this sounds really time-consuming, Mark. Are there any shortcuts? Well, the bad news, if you're looking for a shortcut, is that there is no shortcut. You've just got to do it. But so I opened with the idea here that it's something that we should already be doing. So rather than just trying to check a box to say, yep, we're compliant, we're actually trying to create a sustainable, ongoing, successful business, and it makes sense to connect with those who are going to buy our products and ask them what they want and what those expectations are. So there's no shortcuts to that. We just have to do the work. But when you do the work and you crunch the numbers and then you make the changes, now you've got people that are ready and waiting to buy. So then you've got some way of recovering the cost, if you like, of that investment. So you've got to avoid those shortcuts. A generic template asking an employer to simply sign off will not be an effective means of demonstrating your industry engagement. I've got to get you past that. I know in the past that some auditors have accepted that, but they will absolutely not accept that now. It's got to be meatier than that. There's got to be more depth to it, and you really have to demonstrate that you've done the work, and then they've got outcomes that are defendable as a result of that. So a quick poll for us, folks. How often does your organisation schedule industry engagement activities? Do you do it weekly, monthly, quarterly, annually, or never? Hopefully it's not never. Feel free to vote now. Ultimately, at least annually. But I find an issue with doing it only once a year because a lot can change in 12 months. So a personal perspective, I'll go back to what I was saying with Damien earlier, which is I think you need to have some deliberate industry engagement, and in our organisation we do that on a quarterly basis, okay, deliberately. And then we fill out the rest of the 12 months with what we call is organic industry engagement. So we participate in a lot of events, we speak at a lot of events, we talk to people in our sector quite a bit. We're able to capture that through our logs, and then anything significant that comes from that has also got the same action items as a result. So Damien, can you share the results of that poll now, please?
Here they come, Mark.
So 36% of our respondents today are saying monthly, which is great. Another third is talking about quarterly, 21% annually, 7% are saying never. So we won't share that with anybody, but certainly doing it on a regular basis is going to be important. But I also recognise that some of us are in smaller RTOs or boutique RTOs where realistically time is against us. And I've mentioned this in other webinars before. We're not only time poor in RTO world, sometimes we're poor destitute, and we really have to kind of work out what is going to be the best use of our time so that we can stay above the water. But at the same time, if you program things that are both deliberate and organic, you can find a schedule that's going to work for you. And as I've mentioned earlier in this webinar, I'd actually schedule the assessment validation activities on the same schedule as the industry validation, as the industry engagement. And the reason I do that is for transparency. I can kind of see if there are opportunities for me to speak to the same person about maybe 2 or 3 different things at that particular moment. Or if I've got so many activities in the same month, maybe it doesn't make sense to add another one because I won't be out there selling anything else. I'm doing all the engagement or validation. So having that full transparency over the 12 months is really good. So when we talk about the validation stuff, we have to have a 5-year plan. I actually have that 5-year plan, which includes the industry engagement as well. So both of those things happen, and then we update that on an annual basis to make sure we're really respecting what the best way to get that information is. So it all fits in the same log, and you'll get a copy of that log, if you like, or a template for that log as part of this webinar today. So we are at about the 3/4 mark of our webinar, and for those that have joined us in the past, I do like to give you your 30 seconds of Zen, have a quick break, a quick stretch break, and then we'll come back for the homeward bound session of this particular webinar.
Now today I do feel as though we need to have a very authentic and honest experience with you, ladies and gentlemen, and the truth is that I think Mark isn't doing that stretch today, but I think he might be just sitting back doing some other stretches, something a little bit more easier. But Mark, if you want to prove me wrong, if you want me to show your webcam so you can take the position, do not hesitate, and I'll be happy to do that for you.
There are some things that people don't need to see, Damien, and that is one of them. I did do an actual stretch, but it may not have been as authentic as the one on the screen. So listen, hopefully if you've stretched it out, grabbed a glass of water, and we'll kick on for the final part of our webinar today. So I'm going to open up with this question. What challenges do you have presently in maintaining industry engagement? Please feel free to pop your best ideas in the chat window. What's challenging you right now with getting this done?
Let's get the bad stuff out of the road.
Time. As we said, we're time destitute, not just time poor. And that's why having that schedule, I think, with full transparency around other operational things is super important. So this is a theme, time. It's almost like that, what's that, Cyndi Lauper, time after time, time after time after time.
Do you want to grab your guitar, Mark?
Perhaps, but for some of you at least, I think I've created an earwig. You'll be singing or humming time after time for the rest of today, and I apologise for that.
I'm not sure that sounded like an authentic apology.
Listen, Helen's got some diversity there, which is encouraging the staff to actually do it. So getting the staff to actually do it. And listen, I've got some strategies for that, Helen. So hopefully in the handouts there that I'll give you, I'll be able to facilitate that process for you, and I'll talk to that as we look at those before we finish up today. So definitely time is an issue, and listen, that's been truthful for us as well at Mr. Wed, and that's why it's so important to use the technology at your disposal to program it in. So you've got your transparency, you've got the schedule, you've got what we're considering as the deliberate engagement, and it makes sense to do it around other activities. So we might say, for instance, we've got a few events coming up. So I'm actually MC at the International Vet Summit, which is run by InSources in June, and that provides a great opportunity for me to connect in a deliberate way with other presenters that are there, other vendors that are there, and of course the delegates that are right in the pocket of our customer base. So I can decide to use that as both a deliberate opportunity to say I want to talk to these particular people. I can set it up ahead of time, but then of course I've got organic feedback that I can get from other people I didn't expect to speak to, but then I've got a way of recording that through the log as well. And then later in the year we're at the National Vet Conference, which is also in Sydney. It's run by VELG, and again a great opportunity there with people that are right in the pocket for our client group. So what I'm suggesting there is you might be able to kill multiple birds with a single event. You can do your PD, which is great for your trainers. You can do your organic information, getting some of those golden nuggets about what industry you're looking for, but you can also set up very specific meetings with those people. Now, I'm going to tell you something else, and this is a take it or leave it. You've got to kind of feel comfortable about it. In the past, there are some events where I thought I really want to speak to people, but I don't want to go to the event because I'm not going to do any professional development. So what I've done is I've kind of hijacked it a little bit by staying near the event and then connecting with people who I know that are going to attend it and asking to catch up with them during a lunch or after the event. So I still connect with them. They're still there and buzzing because they're at that particular networking professional development event, but I haven't paid for the event myself. But I haven't gone, but you just have to feel comfortable with that. So a bit of guerrilla industry engagement there. I know where they're going to be, and I end up being close to where they are and connecting with them and asking them to meet me just outside the gate, as it were. So some food for thought there. Now, Liz says it might be difficult from Western Australia. You might want to qualify that for me, so I might be able to give you some advice on how to make that happen. Neil supports my very sneaky but cost-effective and efficient way of connecting with industry engagement. So as I take it or leave it, make sure it works. Non-conferencing perhaps, or non-ferencing. Maybe it's called non-ferencing, Damien. So I like the term. We might need to coin that. But listen, I'm sure that I can give you some advice on how to move this forward. Liz has qualified now by saying they're attending events unless they're virtual meetings. So again, that is difficult when you're in a remote location, not just out in the West, but if you're in a remote area of your state and you can't get access to it, or in fact you can't get the budget to go into those big city locations that tend to host those events, then we need to be a little bit more creative around that too. So perhaps doing things like we're doing here and setting up your own event and encouraging people to be a part of that might be a way through. Using webinar software such as this, it becomes quite an effective way of bringing people together. Last year I did some basically some free webinars that were a sort of vet insider webinar. So I invited people who were sort of market leaders or leaders in the RTO space or that vet space. We put it out to our network saying it's totally free, asked them a few questions. But in the end, I was able to ask them questions that related to things that were important to not only the delegates, but to us at Mr. WED. And we can count that as industry engagement because we've got people who are the industry leaders or the thought leaders as well. So that might be something to think about as well, creating your own events and inviting people to them, particularly if they've got access to those people as well. So in two of the cases, I had people that had books or other publications they wanted to promote. So that was their reason for giving up their time, and we didn't pay them to be a part of that. The delegates were really happy because they didn't have to pay for the PD, but it was nice and relevant for them. So everyone's a winner in this particular case. But yes, again, it does take time to organise those things and, of course, to deliver them. So I do want to give you my blueprint for success and 5 easy, I'll underline that, easy steps for success. And I'll lead with this first idea, which I've already stated during the webinar today, which is have some sort of an annual plan, which includes both the deliberate and the organic engagement opportunities. Have a look at when's the best time to catch your people, because of course from their perspective they might have some peak operational issues. So there's days and months of the year that may not be relevant for them. So let's have a look at when's the best time to connect with them, and then plan those deliberate situations, and then look at those other events, either ones you create yourself or in fact the ones that are already scheduled, to see if you can kind of connect with them and get some further information. Then use some sort of an industry engagement log, which is a detailed record that includes all the regulatory requirements that show the connection between who you've spoken to and what the outcomes are as a result of that engagement. The next thing I think is critical, the third step, is having some sort of a sample log for staff. So one of the comments that came up in the chat window earlier was getting the staff to do it. I think part of the problem is they don't really know what they're doing. They don't know how much detail you're looking for and how to get it back to the right person to make those changes or improvements or to reflect that in future design decisions. So having a sample log which provides the instruction and a sample of what to complete will be a really positive way of making this work. And then you just add it to their staff induction. So any new staff that come through, it's part of normal business. You say this is part of your job to get this and return this to this particular place. And then of course you add it to the job descriptions as well. So a lot of people say, oh, I'm a trainer, that's not my job. I think we've got to get past that again and say, listen, you know, your frontline staff, you're talking with customers. We need to know what they know. We need to know what they want, and you're in the best position to get that information. But we also recognise you've got lots of other things to do, so we want to make it as easy as possible to facilitate that process. Here's the log, here's the kind of depth we're looking for, and this is how you get it back to us. So that's kind of what I'm suggesting at this particular case. The fourth thing is to have an industry contact list. Now, you might be laughing at me when I say this first, but you will thank me later for this. Having a central updated database, whether it's virtual or in hard copy, which has the list of those particular people, who their assistant is if they don't contact them straight away, their email, their phone, their mobile, their Skype ID, all of those things updated. So when you go in and say, okay, next week I'm going to connect with Damien about these things, I can send the quick email ahead of time saying, are we still on for Tuesday? Great, fantastic. Here are a few things I want us to have as talking points, or here might be some interesting information ahead of time. Can I call you on FaceTime or Skype or your mobile? What's the best way to get this to you? Ultimately, that will save you a bucket load of time at the back end. This also means if the person in your organisation who is charged with doing the industry engagement leaves your organisation, all this great information still exists and their replacement can keep it flowing. Often what happens in a compliance space is that the people leave and then they have to learn all those new skills on the fly. So this is just a way of kind of future-proofing your personnel. And then the final part of my 5 easy steps for success is having some mechanism for staff to update the log. Now this could be in paper form or some sort of place that in a dedicated location on the server. You might have an e-template in your client management system, your CMS. Or whatever way it is, you can do it. I've seen some organisations have used their smartphones to actually physically record the conversation with somebody face-to-face at a conference, either as audio or video, and then they've uploaded that into the cloud as evidence that it happened, and then somebody else has kind of taken the key talking points and then added that into a log down the track. As long as you've got a system for it, life will be beautiful. So there was a question in the chat window here that we already pre-prepared. Was what does this look like? How do we make this work? And I think in this particular case, Joe was asking the question. This is kind of one thing as a starting point. You will get a copy of both of these in your courseware as your resources that will come out with the link. Ultimately, here at the top of this page is the sample template. So it's got, this is what you would fill out, and it's got all the information there, and underneath you've got some examples of what you might look at providing in terms of depth. So when you give somebody a blank template, sometimes they don't know what to fill out completely, so you give them the blank template, and then the one underneath is helpful to let them know how much information they should be providing. So again, some food for thought. So that's available as an Excel spreadsheet, and that's what will come out to you as part of your information. Now, I have included a second template for you, which is something that we use additionally, because we kind of use this to capture the feedback on the run, and then we put it into a central place, which is our industry engagement log. And you'll get this as a Word document, okay? So what happens here is that every time we have some sort of a client engagement activity, whether it be a face-to-face thing or a phone call or a webinar like this, then we describe that, we talk about who was involved. So in this case, what we do, just to make it easier because the space is not really big, is we just use the first initial of their first name and the first initial of their last name. So in this case, MR would be Mark Ratcliffe, and then in your copy, you'll see that there's a log that you can add all that information in on the last page. So you're able to put your ready rector there about what all those two-letter acronyms are kind of relating to. So who was involved with that engagement, what the date was, what was discussed, how it was discussed. So was it face-to-face, was it a phone call, Skype call, email, was it at a conference, what's the detail there, what was the outcome of that, which is kind of important, okay? So what was achieved or agreed to, and then the really important one, the final one there, is the review or the follow-up. What were the next steps? Okay, it's one thing to have an outcome of the engagement, but what did you do with it? So if they said we'd like to see some changes or some other options, let's say for electives in that particular qualification, well, the follow-up should be, how do we then provide that repackaging, how do we customize that, and then how do we get back to the client with those options. So you might have hyperlinks in that last column to the new documents that you've created as a result of that engagement. That's kind of how we manage it at Mr. Wet. And then we just add, every time we do it, we just add a new line, and it just goes on and on and on until the end of the year. And then we kind of put that up in the server as 2016, and then 2017 we started all over again. So where this starts for us is that we start off that year with all the deliberate stuff on the log, and then as the organic ones come in via that previous one through the Excel spreadsheet, we then update this log so it becomes a living document throughout that 12-month period. So I've given you my spin on the 5 easy steps, but I'm interested in what you think, and do you see any benefits and pitfalls of the approach? I'll start off on the positive side. What do you think is a good thing about those 5 steps and those industry logs that I've just shared with you? So that Neil needs to leave, but listen, thanks for joining us again, Neil, and we'll see you at another event. So Melissa's saying that it's easy and easy to follow, and it flows well, which is great. There's a built-in process, is what Alexandria is suggesting. It's clear and concise, Helen adds. So Melissa says, that their engagement templates are a bit too involved. So I would agree. It's something that everyone needs to be able to use and actually do it. It's easy to complete, and I've got to attest to that. It is easy to complete as long as you don't wait 12 months to do it. It's got to be something that's a living document. So that's something that needs to be updated. So having someone responsible for that update is going to be important in your organisation, and I take that role in our business because it makes some sense. Even though I've got someone in a compliance-driven role, I've taken it as my responsibility that industry engagement is in kind of my portfolio. So that's how I know that it's done. What about the pitfalls? What are some dangers, perhaps, of the approach? I'd like to think that it's perfect, but listen, I understand that not everything is going to work for everybody. So it's good to have the engagement, but making sure that those things actually change is going to be the important part. So I agree with you, Melissa, there. Just because it's on paper doesn't necessarily mean that they've got the ongoing changes. Having said that, I do like that final steps column there, which kind of advises us or anybody else that looks at it whether or not something has been actioned. So, someone like myself in a responsive role can go back and say, hang on, we said we would do this, we haven't done it yet. Why hasn't that happened? So at least there's some sort of transparency internally when we're doing our reviews. Tina says, if your RTO covers multiple industry sectors, it's not easy to see this on the log if you've missed a particular industry. So, there's a couple of things you can do with it. You can either add an extra column, which is kind of what we do. You can't see it in my example there. Is what I've done in that word one there is that I'll highlight what the qualification is or industry is, and so and I'll put a color on it. So I'll highlight, and it's a different color. Now, if you're a TAFE or something, you've got like 600 qualifications. That's a lot harder. But we've got 4, so it's a lot easier for me to have yellow and green and blue and whatever else for those particular things. So yeah, something to think about there might be to identify that. So visually, you can see which ones are not covered just by looking at the color, rather than sifting through every page to see if it's all covered. So I'll leave that up to you. Or you could split it by industry, as Melissa's saying as well, and that might be another way of managing that. So team, the final thing I wanted you to really think about, and this is, I guess, is playing into what you were saying before about time being your mortal enemy, is that maybe you might want to consider some virtual assistants to help organise the engagement or validation practices. Again, you need to feel comfortable with this, and we've moved towards this approach in some other areas of our business and found that it's a really cost-effective way to get things done. So I'm not necessarily giving you a recommendation, but here are 3 to consider and have a look at. So you've got Virtually Yours that are based in Sydney, and I think they offshore to the Philippines. You've got Virtual Co-worker, which are based here in Queensland, and Again, I think that they're in places like India, and then the guys we actually do use now is a combination between EasyVA and Boss Tech Web. I've given you the Boss Tech Web reference this time because what I like about these guys is they have a dream team. So they have like dozens of different staff based in the Philippines. Some are graphic artists, some are call center workers, some do video editing, some do a whole bunch of other stuff. So it means that I pay for 40 hours and that I can use those 40 hours for anyone in the dream team, whereas in the first two I might have 40 hours but it's with the same person. So if I want a variety of tasks done, that's not the most efficient for me. But you might have 40 hours worth of work that you want by a single person, so I'll leave that decision up to you moving forward. So a quick show of hands, we're right at the back end of our webinar. Who thinks they're in a better place to tackle industry engagement now that they've attended our webinar today? Hopefully that will be us. So it looks like we are well on track, folks, and we've given you a few new things to check out. Hopefully you've got some takeaways. Feel free to pop your best ideas in the chat window, some things you'll specifically do as a result of our time together. Remembering in the next 24 hours you will get a chance to get all those resources we've looked at and talked about, and I'll add that extra one about those expectations for TAE trainers as well. So all of that will come your way with the link to this particular webinar as well. I recognise we are bang on the end time there, so if you have to leave, I totally understand that. But if you've got any other questions you want to pop into the chat window or have Damien take you off the mute and ask them directly, I'm happy to check that one there. Joe asked a quick question there about which is the name of the Philippines workers company. So I might jump back that one quickly for a second there. It's the Boss Tech Web guys at the bottom. So go to that particular site, Joe, that'll help you out with finding that information. So today we covered what industry engagement was, the responsibilities for RTOs, who the industry were, the must-haves according to the regulator, a blueprint for success. There were my 5 easy steps for success, followed by a final look at the benefits and pitfalls, and then I gave you some food for thought about using those virtual co-workers to really help them manage that time and the cost. As Damien mentioned earlier, we do have some upcoming webinars. The next one coming your way is the Online Trainers Toolkit, Strategies to Engage in Live and Online Training. If you've liked our experience today and want to learn how to do more of that, feel free to check that one out. And then the next one after that is all about validating training and assessment. We'd love to see you on another webinar soon. As always, thanks so much, Damien, for pushing all the buttons and making sure it all came together. And thank you for attending and making such a lively discussion in the chat window. You guys have been awesome. Thanks so much.
And thank you, Mark. It looks like there's no outstanding questions at the moment, so we don't like to keep you on the line unnecessarily. We hope you've got great value out of this webinar. Please remember to fill in that survey as you exit. It's likely to pop up in your face. Otherwise, you'll have a chance to answer that with a link that appears in the email that you'll receive tomorrow. Thank you very much to all of you for all the thanks that you're throwing in the chat. We really, really appreciate it. And that's it for today. So thank you very much for attending the webinar. We hope you've got a lot of value, and we'd love to see you on another one very soon. Goodbye, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you.